talk about the beautiful business of milk today, yeah. I got milk. Let's talk about milk. Oh yeah, baby, let's talk about the beautiful business of milk today.
This episode of Got Milk is sponsored by Shunya Agritech, the folks revolutionizing cattle nutrition with hydroponic green fodder. Visit their website at shunya.live for more details or download the Shunya app from Play Store or App Store.
Hey, listener name, and welcome back. You know, we always try to cater these deep dives to what you're interested in, and since we know you're really into food systems, we thought this one would be right up your alley.
Yeah, we're really excited about this one.
It's all about milk.
Milk.
But not just any milk. We're going deep into what it takes to produce a glass of milk in India.
Really gets you thinking about the journey our food takes.
Right. I mean, we usually don't think twice about pouring a glass of milk, but there's a whole world behind that simple act.
Absolutely.
So to get into all of this, we're diving into a research paper called Milk Quality and Safety Issues Inside the Farm Gate of Dairy Farmers of Punjab, India.
Catchy title, right?
Yeah, well, it's a mouthful, but it's full of incredible insights.
For sure.
It's by researchers at Guru Angad Dev Veterinary and Animal Sciences University, or GODVACU for short.
Ah, good VCU.
Yeah, and they published this study in 2021. And it's not just some boring academic report. It actually gives us a glimpse into the lives of Indian dairy farmers and the decisions they make every day that could actually affect what's in your cereal bowl.
And that's what makes this so relevant for everyone listening, even if you're not planning a trip to India anytime soon. I mean, India is the world's largest milk producer, so understanding the practices on their farms, the challenges they face, it matters on a global scale.
Totally. And you won't believe some of the things we uncovered in the study. For example, do you know some farmers actually feed their cows while they are milking?
While they're milking?
Yeah, and sometimes they'll even use wooden ash to clean their milk utensils.
Really?
I know, right? Like, what's going on there?
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? How cultural practices and local contexts can really influence food production.
For sure. So before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty, let's paint a picture of India's dairy industry. It's massive, over 302 million dairy animals.
Wow, that's more than the entire population of the United States.
Yeah.
I know, it's mind-boggling. And Punjab, the region where our study takes place, is one of the leading milk-producing states in India.
And within that huge industry, a majority of the milk production comes from smallholder dairy farmers. These are families working incredibly hard to make a living and contribute to this vital food source. But they often face unique challenges, especially when it comes to keeping their milk safe and high quality.
Exactly, which is what makes this research paper so important. It focuses on 300 dairy farmers in Punjab, and the researchers even tested their milk to get a real sense of what's happening on the ground.
Really valuable data.
All right, so let's meet these farmers. The study found that most of them were men over 40 with at least 10 years of schooling, and many had been dairy farming for over 20 years.
Oh, wow. Talk about experience.
Right. And most of the farms were small to medium-sized with a mix of cows and buffalo.
These are people who've dedicated their lives to this work. They have a deep connection to their animals, and the land and their livelihoods depend on it.
Absolutely. But here's where things get interesting. The researchers tested the farmers' knowledge in 5 key areas related to milk quality and safety: milker hygiene, animal hygiene, environmental hygiene, milk handling, and antibiotic residues in milk. And get this, 64% of them scored LOW across all 5 areas.
Really?
Yeah, that's a pretty big knowledge gap, and it makes you wonder how it affects the quality of the milk they're producing.
And potentially the safety of that milk, too. It makes you think about the importance of education and training for these farmers.
Exactly. If over half of them in this major milk-producing region are lacking this knowledge, it could have a real impact on everyone who drinks milk.
And it raises questions about the potential risks, but it also highlights an opportunity. Think about the positive impact if we could bridge that knowledge gap.
For sure. Okay, so now that we know there's room for improvement, let's dive into the specific hygiene practices they observed. Remember, these are real-life situations, and what might seem strange or unconventional to us could be totally normal for them.
It's all about perspective, right?
Exactly. So starting with milker hygiene, almost all of the milkers wash their hands before milking.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, but then things took a bit of a turn.
Oh,
Well, most of them weren't getting tested for brucellosis, which is a bacterial disease that can spread from animals to humans through milk.
oh, I see.
And many of them didn't change clothes before milking or even trim their nails regularly.
Those little details matter.
They really do. And get this, some of them were even chewing tobacco while milking.
Chewing tobacco while milking.
Well, we know, it's a little unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah, it really highlights the need for more education about best practices and how even seemingly small actions can have a big impact.
Okay, so moving on to animal hygiene, things got even more interesting. Many farmers didn't regularly test their animals for zoonotic diseases. Those are the ones that can spread between animals and humans.
That's a little concerning.
Right. And what's even more worrying is that many of them were using milk from cows that were actually sick.
That's definitely not ideal from a food safety perspective.
Yeah. So maybe not off to the best start here, but let's see if things look any better when we move on to environmental hygiene.
Hopefully there are some more positive practices in this area.
Well, the good news is that almost all the farmers cleaned their farm premises and milk storage areas daily.
Okay, that's encouraging.
But here's the catch. Not many of them used disinfectants, and most didn't have separate milking parlors.
I see. So while regular cleaning is a good first step, using disinfectants adds that extra layer of protection, and having a dedicated milking parlor helps keep the milking process separate from other activities on the farm.
All right, so now that we've covered the basics, let's get into the actual milk handling process. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little squeamish.
I'm ready.
Okay, so the researchers found that farmers used a variety of utensils: steel, aluminum, even plastic. Apparently, steel is the best because it's easier to clean and doesn't scratch as easily.
Makes sense. Scratches can harbor bacteria, making things harder to clean.
Exactly. And then there's the milking method itself. Most farmers did it by hand, but some use a technique called knuckling.
Knuckling? What's that?
It's basically squeezing the teat between their knuckles.
Ouch. I can imagine that might hurt the cow.
Yeah, it's not ideal. And speaking of things that don't belong in milk, get this. Some farmers actually fed their cows while they were milking them.
Really?
Yeah, I guess it keeps the cows happy and occupied, but it definitely increases the chances of something ending up in the milk that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, like feed or dirt or who knows what else.
Okay, are you ready for another one? This one's a little gross.
Hit me with it.
So it involves the first few squirts of milk from each teat. They're called forestrips, and they should be discarded because they have higher levels of bacteria.
Makes sense.
But many of the farmers either weren't discarding them at all, or even worse, they were feeding them back to the cows.
Oh, wow.
I know it's kind of gross, right? But wait, it gets even weirder. Are you ready for this?
I think so. Lay it on me.
Some of the farmers were using wooden ash to clean their utensils.
Wooden ash.
Yep. Apparently it's a traditional practice in Punjab, but not exactly the most hygienic method these days.
It's interesting how tradition and modern hygiene practices sometimes clash.
Definitely. And speaking of modern tools, they weren't using enough of the California Mastitis Test Kit, or CMT kit. It's a simple test that can help detect mastitis, which is an infection of the udder.
Right. Mastitis can have a big impact on milk quality.
Exactly. So all of this brings us to the issue of antibiotic residues in milk.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The study found that many farmers were using milk from cows that were being treated with antibiotics.
That's not good. And it makes you wonder if they understand the concept of withdrawal periods, the time it takes for antibiotics to clear out of the cow's system after treatment.
That's the thing, many of them didn't fully grasp that idea, which means that milk could end up with antibiotic residues in it.
It really shows how a lack of knowledge can have unintended consequences.
And to make matters worse, some farmers had easy access to antibiotics without even needing a prescription.
That's not ideal for encouraging responsible drug use.
So we've talked a lot about the hygiene and milk handling practices, but what about the actual quality of the milk? Did all of this have a measurable impact?
That's what I want to know. Let's get into the results.
Okay, so the researchers didn't just observe the farmers, they actually tested the milk itself to see if all of these practices were affecting the quality.
Smart move. One thing to talk about potential problems, but seeing the results in the milk itself is much more powerful.
Right. They tested for three main things: somatic cell count, SCC adulteration, which means if someone's been messing with the milk, like watering it down, and E. coli contamination.
Okay, all important indicators of milk quality.
So first up, somatic cell count. Remember how we talked about some farmers using milk from sick cows? Well, the SCC in their milk samples was way higher than the recommended standard.
Not surprising, really.
Mhm.
If the cows aren't healthy, it's going to show up in the milk.
Exactly. And high SEC not only affects the taste and quality of the milk, it can also indicate problems with animal welfare.
So it's a sign that something's not right on the farm.
Exactly. Okay, so what about adulteration? Was it as bad as we might expect?
Good question. What did the study find?
Well, it wasn't as widespread as you might think. Only 5% of the samples were watered down, and 3% were positive for urea, which is sometimes added to milk to make it seem like it has more protein.
Okay, so adulteration was present, but not the biggest issue they found.
Right. But hold on to your hats, because here comes the real shocker. A whopping 24% of the milk samples were contaminated with E. coli.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know. It's a clear sign that some of those hygiene practices, like not using disinfectants or having separate milking areas, could be contributing to this contamination.
Definitely underscores the point that even small oversights in hygiene can have big consequences for food safety.
So we've been focusing on farms in India, but I'm wondering, what does all this mean for us thousands of miles away? Does what happens on those farms actually affect us directly?
That's a great question, and it's one we should all be asking ourselves more often. The truth is that in today's global food system, what happens in India can affect what ends up on our tables here in listeners' country region.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Absolutely. Think about it. India is a major player in the global dairy market. A lot of the milk produced there is exported, processed into different dairy products, and ends up all over the world.
So if there are issues with the milk at the source, those issues can travel through the whole supply chain and reach consumers far beyond India.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the challenges of milk production in different parts of the world is so important. It's not just about the milk itself. It's about the global network of people, policies, and practices that shape our entire food system.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on that carton of milk in my fridge.
Me too.
Eh.
It's easy to take something as basic as milk for granted, but when we really dig in, we realize just how much goes into getting that milk from the farm to our table.
So we've talked about the challenges and the risks, but what about solutions? Is there anything we can do to improve things in places like Punjab?
Absolutely. There's a lot we can do. There are so many promising ideas and initiatives out there that can really make a difference.
Like what? Give me some hope.
Well, first of all, education is key. We need to give farmers the knowledge and skills to implement better practices. That means providing training programs that cover everything from basic hygiene to animal health management to responsible antibiotic use.
So it's not about telling them what to do, it's about giving them the tools to make informed decisions.
Exactly. And it's important to make sure that training is relevant, easy to understand, and applicable to their everyday lives.
It has to be practical, right? They need to be able to actually use what they learn.
Absolutely. And on top of training, access to technology can also play a huge role. Imagine if farmers had simple, affordable tools to test their milk quality right there on the farm.
That would be amazing. They could catch problems early on and fix them before the milk even leaves the farm.
Exactly. And there are already some really cool technologies being developed and used in India. For example, there are portable milk quality testing kits that can check for things like SEC and adulteration in minutes.
That's incredible. And I bet it wouldn't take much to get those kits into the hands of more farmers.
Definitely. And then there's the power of incentives. What if farmers were rewarded for producing high-quality milk? It could be a price premium or access to better markets.
So everyone wins. Farmers are encouraged to improve their practices, consumers get better quality milk, and the whole system benefits.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the role of government policies and regulations. Stronger enforcement of food safety standards and investment in rural infrastructure can make a big difference.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not just one solution, but a combination of education, technology, incentives, and policy all working together.
You got it. It's a complex problem, but definitely not impossible. With the right effort, we can see real progress in improving milk quality and safety all over the world.
And remember, listener name, even though we've been focusing on India, these issues aren't unique to one country. Similar challenges exist in dairy industries everywhere, even in countries with more developed systems.
That's an important point. It's a reminder that we're all part of a global food system, and that the choices we make as consumers, policymakers, and industry leaders have ripple effects far beyond our own communities.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to take a moment to think about what we've learned so far. What are some of the key takeaways that have stuck with you? What surprised you the most? And what questions are still swirling around in your head?
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
From those eye-opening hygiene practices to those concerning E. coli levels, We've really gotten a glimpse into the complexities of milk production in India.
I know, I started out feeling a little grossed out, but then I started thinking about the bigger picture, the economic realities for these farmers, the lack of resources and information, and the traditions that influence their practices.
It's easy to judge from the outside looking in, but when we step into their shoes, we gain a much deeper understanding of the challenges they face.
It's like instead of pointing fingers, we should be asking, how can we help? How can we work together to create a system that supports both farmers and consumers?
I couldn't agree more. It's about finding solutions that benefit everyone, farmers, consumers, animals, and the environment.
Okay, so I'm feeling a little more hopeful now that we've talked about solutions. We've got education and training, innovative technologies, incentive programs, and even the power of our own choices as consumers.
And don't forget about advocating for stronger regulations and policies. We can all play a role in shaping a better food system.
That's true. I'm curious, though, what about those of us who aren't policymakers or industry leaders? What can everyday people like you and me and listener name do to make a difference?
That's a great question. And the answer is a lot more than you might think. It starts with becoming conscious consumers.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, every time you buy a carton of milk, you're casting a vote for the kind of practices you support.
So it's about knowing where our milk comes from and how it was produced.
Exactly. And that might involve doing some research, checking out the labels, exploring different brands, and looking for certifications that align with your values.
So things like organic certifications or fair trade labels.
Precisely. Those certifications indicate that the milk has been produced according to certain standards that prioritize things like animal welfare, environmental sustainability, or fair labor practices.
I never really paid much attention to those labels before, but now I'm realizing they're actually really important. They represent choices that can have a positive impact on the entire system.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of conversation. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share what you've learned from this deep dive. The more awareness we create, the more we can push for change together.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. And every step we take, every informed choice we make, contributes to a better future for everyone.
So listener name, as we wrap up this deep dive into milk quality in India, we hope you're walking away with not just information, but also a sense of curiosity and empowerment.
We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep making informed choices.
Remember, every glass of milk has a story, and by understanding those stories, we can all help create a better future for everyone involved, from the farmers to the animals to the planet we all share.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep making a difference.
Well, the researchers didn't just observe the farmers. They actually tested the milk to see how these practices were affecting the quality.
Oh, that's a good idea. Makes the risks a lot more real.
Right. They tested for three main things: somatic cell count, or SCC for short, adulteration, and E. coli contamination.
Okay, makes sense. Those are all pretty important when it comes to milk quality.
So first up, SCC. Remember we talked about some farmers using milk from sick cows? Well, the SCC in those milk samples was much higher than it should be.
Not a good sign.
Not good at all. High SCC not only affects the taste and quality of the milk, but it can also be a sign of poor animal welfare.
So it's a red flag that something's not right on the farm.
Exactly. All right, so what about adulteration? Was it as common as you might expect?
I'm curious to hear the results.
Well, it wasn't as widespread as you might think. Only 5% of the samples were watered down, and 3% tested positive for urea, which is something some people add to milk to cheat on the protein content.
Okay, so adulteration was definitely happening, but it wasn't the biggest issue they found.
Right. But get this. Are you ready for the real shocker?
Hit me with it.
24% of the milk samples were contaminated with E. coli.
24%? Wow, that's really high.
I know. It really makes you think about those hygiene practices and how much they matter.
Yeah, like not using disinfectants or having separate milking areas. Those things can really have an impact.
Definitely. So we've been talking a lot about farms in India, but does this actually affect us here in listeners' country region?
That's the question, isn't it? It might seem like a world away, but the truth is what happens on those farms can actually affect us directly.
How so?
Well, think about it. India is a major player in the global dairy market. A lot of the milk they produce is exported all over the world. It's processed into different products and ends up in supermarkets everywhere.
So it's like a chain reaction. If there are problems with the milk at the source, those problems can spread throughout the whole supply chain.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the challenges of milk production in different parts of the world. It's not just about the milk itself. It's about the global network of people and policies and practices that all play a role.
Makes you realize how connected we all are.
It really does. And it makes you appreciate that simple glass of milk a lot more.
That's for sure. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges and the potential risks, but what about solutions? What can we do to improve things in places like Punjab?
There's a lot we can do. And there are so many great ideas out there that can really make a difference.
Like what? I'm all ears.
Well, first of all, education is key. We need to give farmers the knowledge and tools to improve their practices. That means accessible training programs that cover everything from basic hygiene to animal health to responsible antibiotic use.
So it's about empowering them to make better choices.
Exactly. And it's important to make sure that training is relevant to their specific needs and easy to understand.
It has to be practical, right? They need to be able to actually use what they learn.
Absolutely. And beyond, training technology can also play a huge role. Imagine if more farmers had easy and affordable ways to test their milk quality right there on the farm.
That would be a game changer.
It really would.
Yeah.
They could catch problems early on and fix them before the milk even leaves the farm. And there are already some great tools out there, like portable milk quality testing kits that can give results in minutes.
That's incredible. It seems like it wouldn't take much to make a big difference.
And then there's the idea of incentivizing farmers to produce higher quality milk. They could be offered things like price premiums or access to better markets.
That makes sense. It rewards them for their efforts and gives consumers better quality milk. It's a win-win.
Exactly. And of course, let's not forget about the role of government policies and regulations. Stronger food safety standards and investments in rural infrastructure can really help create a better environment for everyone.
So it's a multifaceted approach. It's about combining education, technology, incentives, and policy to create real change.
You got it. It's a complex issue, but definitely not insurmountable. With the right effort, we can see real improvements in milk quality and safety around the world.
And remember, listener name, these issues aren't limited to India. We see similar challenges in dairy industries all over the world, even in countries with more developed systems.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're all part of this global food system, and that the choices we make as consumers, policymakers, and industry leaders can have a ripple effect far beyond our own communities.
So before we move on to the final part of this deep dive, let's take a moment to think about what we've learned so far. What are some of the key takeaways that stood out to you? What surprised you? And what questions are you still thinking about?
It's been a real eye-opener, hasn't it?
It has. We've learned so much about what goes into a glass of milk.
From those hygiene practices to those E. coli numbers, it really makes you think about the whole system.
Yeah. At first, I have to admit, I was a little grossed out by some of those details. But then I started to think about the bigger picture, the economic challenges these farmers are facing and the lack of resources and information.
And their traditions, too. It's important to consider that.
Exactly. It's easy to judge, but when we really try to understand their situation, it changes your perspective.
It does. It's about empathy and trying to find solutions that work for everyone.
So I'm feeling a little more optimistic now that we've talked about some of the solutions, like education and training, new technologies, incentive programs, and even the power of our own choices as consumers.
In advocating for better regulations and policies, we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, what about those of us who aren't policymakers or big industry players? What can everyday people like you and me and listener name do to make a difference?
That's a great question, and the answer is a lot more than you might think.
Yeah.
It starts with being more aware of where our food comes from and the choices we make as consumers.
So like being more conscious about the milk we buy.
Exactly. Every time you buy a carton of milk, you're supporting the practices behind it.
That's a powerful thought. So we should be doing our research and looking for brands that align with our values.
Right. Look for things like organic certifications or fair trade labels. Those are good indicators that the milk was produced in a more sustainable and ethical way.
I never really paid much attention to those labels before, but now I'm realizing they really matter.
They do. And don't forget the power of conversation. Talk to your friends and family about what you've learned. Share this deep dive with them. The more people we can get thinking about these issues, the better.
It all comes back to that idea of being the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. And remember, change takes time. It's a process. But every step we take, every informed choice we make, brings us closer to a better future for everyone.
So listener name, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of milk in India, we hope you're feeling inspired to keep learning and keep questioning.
We encourage you to dig deeper, explore different perspectives, and make choices that align with your values.
Remember, every glass of milk has a story. And by understanding those stories, we can all contribute to a healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable food system for everyone involved.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, listener name. And until next time, stay curious and keep making a difference.
I got milk.